Hi, welcome back to Tuesday's Tips. For those that haven't joined me before, I'm Greg Kaiser, a photographer based out of North Carolina, and this is a new feature that I have started doing, and it comes out obviously on Tuesdays. So happy Tuesday to everybody, and just wanted to do a quick one today. These are not in depth by any stretch. They're just little tips and tricks that I've decided I wanted to share with folks. And the concept for this one came about after a conversation with my wife a few days ago when we were talking about color. Color seems to be a very simple thing. We all had crayons growing up. The Crayola 8 had all the basic colors. But when you get into photo editing, color is a completely different ball game, although it is related. There's a lot of different color altering tools that we have in whatever software you're using. For purposes today, I'm going to be talking about Lightroom, but you can find something similar in pretty much every photo editor out there. So specifically what we're going to be talking about today is color calibration. That's different than hue, saturation, luminance, which is now the color mixer, where you pick like a red tone and you alter the hue and the saturation and the brightness or luminance of that red tone. We're not going to be talking about overall vibrance, overall saturation. We're not talking about color grading, although this does kind of fit into an overall color grade of your images, but it's not the color grading tab per se. So we're going to go ahead and get into it, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can see what we're looking at. Now, this picture that I have up right now is one obviously from the fall. Color is very important just because we're taking a picture of color. So I thought this would be a good one to demonstrate what I'm looking at. Now, obviously, I've already got an edit done on this picture. You can see over here, sliders have all been tweaked. I've gone in, changed the hue, saturation, and luminance, which I talked about. Added a little bit of a curve just to give it some contrast. All I did was boost the midtones here in color grading, which that's another trick for another day. Added a little sharpening, and let's see, yep, a little bit of a vignette. That's what I've done to this, and of course some local stuff. But what I want to get into, and I've gone ahead and zeroed this out, is going to be up here in calibration. And you'll notice my stack over here is probably in a different order than yours, and that is by design. I've put these in the order in which I typically will go through and use them. And calibration is one of those tools that I use early on in the edit process. So I'm kind of coming in later than I would normally, but I wanted to, in full disclosure, show you what I have done to this image. This is not a straight out of camera raw capture at this point. But when we open up the calibration, and for those that aren't familiar with this, it's usually down at the bottom. And if you haven't ever used it, don't feel bad. It's not one of those features that a lot of photographers will use straight out of the box. It is a more advanced technique, but it's one that is easy to learn and has a huge impact. So what you see up here, you have process version 6, which is the current. If you were to go through and look at these, you see version 1, 2, 3, all those. These are just previous releases of Lightroom. So if you wanted to go and do like a version 3, which you liked how that input worked better, you can do that without a problem, but generally you're just going to stay on the current one, and that gives you these particular controls. There hasn't been a whole lot that has changed to this in my experience with Lightroom, but again, it's not something that makes a lot of sense. And it's broken down into these 4 categories. We've got the shadows up here, and it's basically just a tint. You can add that tint either green or magenta, just like you can globally through the entire picture up in the basic tab. Right here under temperature. That takes care of everything across the entire picture. What we are talking about here in calibration is just in the shadow areas, and that's important because you want the shadows and highlights to appear different. it's a rudimentary color grade almost in that situation. And honestly, I don't use that slider a lot. Occasionally I will, but generally I don't. But the next three are the big ones that I think are very important with calibration. You have the red primary, green primary, and blue primary. This is not like the HSL or the color mixer. You are not going to affect just the red colors or just the green colors or just the blue colors. What makes this so useful is that when you look at this screen, every pixel that you see is based on 3 different colors within the pixels. That's the red, green, and blue. And you might be starting to make the connection with Adobe RGB, red, green, blue. That's the color space that we work in, and this is what affects those, and it's how the colors are rendered, because every color that you see is made up of a combination of these 3 primary colors, red, green, and blue. So when we're looking here, we see green, but there are reds in here, there are blues in here, maybe not a lot. When you look in the sky, there are reds and greens, not just blues. So these 3 colors live in every color within the picture, which makes this calibration so interesting. And what we're going to do, just to kind of get used to what these sliders do, we're going to play with them. That's the easiest way to learn most things in Lightroom. So with the red primary on the hue slider, if we bring it all the way over to the left, now we have this nuclear holocaust red, which has a lot of magenta in it. On the other end of the spectrum, it is mostly orange and almost yellowing. So it depends on what you're looking for. But also, let's say we'll go down, look at the greens. If you go all the way over to the left, it changes those greens more to a yellowy tone. But it affects the reds up in the tree. Because as you come back over here, you see how the reds are changing and they're more bright when the greens get that really, really deep, like bright emerald green, almost a Crayola green. It changes the reds in the trees. So we are changing all of the pixels with each one of these 3 sliders, depending on the ratio of red, blue, and green that are in each one of the colors. Same thing with the blue. Go all the way over here to the left. That almost affected the reds more than the sky, but you see the sky turned more of a cyan now. But if we wanted to bring that more into a purpley kind of deal, go to the right, that blue primary, and you see it changed the greens. It almost eliminated the reds and oranges here in this tree. So, as they say, a little dab will do you. You don't need much with these sliders. Just a little bit will make a huge difference in that final thing. But you also have to look at the saturation. And again, without changing the hue, you can change the saturation of all the red pixels within the scene. And you see how it's changing the greens as well as the reds and oranges? Just moving the saturation a lot of times will give you a lot of punch, especially in a landscape picture. If you don't want to change the hue, move the saturation up and it will give you a lot of punch. Same thing with the green, although you don't see as much benefit with doing things out of the green channel, at least in landscape. I'll show you what I normally do, but you can see how all of this changes. Blue, much like red, will have a huge impact on the scene. And you see how it just brightens up the yellows, greens, and just a little bit of the blues, but it has more of an effect on the yellows and greens. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And with this particular picture, like I said, the shadows look fine, but if I wanted to add more green into the shadows, I could do that. Or maybe I like a little bit more magenta. Nah, none of those really work for me, so I'm going to zero that back out. And I've got some notes here just to make it a little bit easier. with the reds, I didn't want to bring all that magenta in because, as you see, just moving it to the left, the reds turn very unrealistic. So I actually just gave it a small boost up to about there, just to kind of turn the reds a little bit orange, just to take the bite out of the reds and give a nice gradation here with the colors. I wanted a little more saturation, so I boosted that up to about there. And you see, if we do the little eyeball over to the left to see what our progress is, look at the other colors in the scene. It's very subtle, but we're getting a little bit of richness in the greens because I boosted the saturation here. Now at the green primary, I don't do an awful lot with this and rarely will bring it over to this side. If I want to add more contrast between colors and there's a lot of green in the scene, I might do that, but I generally don't like those real deep greens. I like my greens a little more yellow, so I will generally bring this down a little bit, about -28, and that just yellows the greens a little bit and warms the scene. I do like warm tones, so by putting more yellow in the green, that helps that tremendously. Blues, oh, and I didn't do any saturation shifts to that, but the blues, I usually like them a little more to the cyan side, and that's kind of a recent taste for me. But that will affect the sky and it will affect how the blues interact with the warmer tones, which now the greens are a warmer tone. So that's why I do that. And like saturation on the blues, I move that up to about there. This is all very, very basic. Well, not necessarily basic, but it's subtle changes. And you can go back to the eyeball and you see how there is a definite change in how the colors are rendered and the saturation levels. And again, by doing this at the beginning of the editing process, after you get the basic panel done, you then can move into the color mixer and fine tune, because these are the ones, when it says you're going to change the red, it means just the red tones. It's not going to affect anything else, just the red tones, just the blue tones, just the orange tones, all that. What we did in calibration affected the pixels across the entire picture, changed the relationship, and it added or subtracted from the contrast levels. So those are some things to keep in mind, especially when you're wanting to bring out certain colors. It is very important to use the calibration module, and you can do just those little small shifts in color to bring out what you want in the photo. And obviously here I wanted to make the reds and oranges pop. I wanted to bring the greens down a little bit and wanted to kind of tint the sky to match the road, which I was able to do here through calibration. And see, it just generally warmed up everything down here. So keep that in mind. It's not something that you have to do on every photo, although I have started really using this quite a bit just for those subtle changes. So that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. And again, don't feel bad if you're not using it. If you're not ready to start using it, don't worry about it. But keep it in the back of your head that it is a possibility. Thank you, and if you have any suggestions, let me know. I'm happy to do anything by request. We'll see you back here again next Tuesday.